Hey, welcome along. Thank you for agreeing to do essentially what is the pilot episode. So it's technically not the first episode, but it's like a test run. It's the pilot of what's going to be the Craig Griffin universe. So very, very exciting, I must say. And so glad to have my partner in all things, partner in business, partner in life, partner in marriage, partner in everything, my amazingly incredible wife, Michelle Griffin. Thank you for being here.
What can I say? It's an honour. I'm glad you're excited and new adventure.
Yeah, very much so. I guess one of the first things that I'd like to just say is that it highlights, if anyone was to want to know about setting up a podcast or, this is literally my first podcast. So I'm learning as I go. But if anyone's looking at starting a podcast, starting anything, it all pretty much starts with building that team of people around you to help plan things. Bounce the initial idea off, to help plan things along the way, just to be that support, and to obviously help with the physical carrying out of everything, the setting up all of the equipment. It doesn't matter what you're doing. A little bit of a fly there joining in. Shoot fly, don't bother me. It's very important to have that support network, whether it's just one other person or a team of people. It's just so important, I guess, to set that up first and have those people around you that believe in you, that support you, that are, willing to roll the sleeves up and actually help you do things. So thank you for doing that and for being that person.
No worries. It's always good to have someone in your corner.
Yeah, definitely.
And help you along with the journey. It's obviously better to have two heads than one.
Definitely, for sure.
But, you're the ideas person. This is your thing. And I'm along for the ride, basically.
And I guess you've touched on a really important part of any team, or even just, if it's a partnership with two people or if it's a team of people, is to have people that, while they still share that common vision or common idea, or are just willing to come along for the ride, also bring something a little different to what you have that help balance out what you bring to the table and what you can offer, that also can see things from a different perspective, can see the things that you can't see. And you very much do that for me. And in most things, we tend to have a very similar view and a very similar perspective, generally speaking, across the board. But then on other things,
different.
Yeah, definitely. And you'll see things from that perspective and go, hey, what about this? And I'm like, well, yeah, totally. Look, I wouldn't have seen that at all in any way, shape or form. And vice versa, there might be some things that I would see that you wouldn't. And just coming from different places, I tend to be more that, I think it's right brain, more that sort of, creative side, whereas you tend to be more the practical left brain, getting things organized, very systematic, very practical. And I think that's what makes us such a great team, because we do share those common values and common goals, and we both have a lot of similar likes and similar ideas. But
well, that's right. You're, if we talk about introvert and extrovert, that's us to a T. But I think what you brings out the best in me, and vice versa. So I think you certainly do things that I would never have done in my time. I certainly enjoyed, getting into, the acting. Not that I'm doing the acting myself, but that entertainment industry. It's always been an interest, but I would never have probably have ever done anything in my time. But having you along and you having that knowledge and experience, it's given me an insight into it and something I enjoyed. And yeah, same with the podcast. It's not something I would have ever have done. I admire the people have a go, And yeah, look, here I am doing a podcast. So
Who'd have thought?
thank you for that. Yeah.
But I mean, even back in the very early days, like back when we first started dating, I do remember you mentioning that you did have that interest in the entertainment industry, but it wasn't to be on camera or to be in front of the microphone. It was that, you know, behind the scenes and organising. I think you mentioned at the time that, you know, like your ideal would be to be a personal assistant, you know, to a performer or to an entertainer, or, you know.
I had the dream going to America and, you know, doing that sort of thing. But, you know, life throws a lot of curveballs, and may not be doing it in Hollywood, so to speak, but we've got our little mini Hollywood here, haven't we?
Exactly. We're sort of Hollywood on the Gold Coast, on the south of the Gold Coast, just over the border.
Yeah.
Shout out to anyone who is joining us internationally. We are actually in Tweed Heads in northern New South Wales. New South Wales is a state of Australia, same state where Sydney is. We're just over the border, basically southern end of the Gold Coast. We're right on the border, just over from Queensland in Australia. So shout out to the rest of the world, and shout out to Hollywood that you mentioned. So if anyone's watching from Hollywood, drop it in the comments. I'm, you know, very much aware that a lot of people watching this may not be when it goes to air. It may not be this week. It may not be this month. It may not be this year. So it could be part of like our origins, where people are actually coming back, watching later episodes down the track and going, hey, let's go back and check out some of the earlier stuff. So this is not even the first episode. If you are joining us, this is like the prequel, if you will. This is like the part of the origin story, in as much as this is what we're considering the pilot episode. It's very much an opportunity for us to test the gear, to test the setup, to see what works, just to sort of get a bit of a feel for everything and see how everything goes. So
guinea pig, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for being the guinea pig.
Someone's got to do it, right?
It's a tough job, you know. It's like being married to me. It's a tough job. Someone has to do it, right?
I can't say I'm a walk in the park either, so I appreciate that.
Oh, you definitely are. So, you know, back to you. I'm very interested for you to tell us, as in myself and the audience, a little bit about your origin story, about where you first started out. It's good that we're in Australia and we've got that fly buzzing around, just to let everyone know that we are in Australia. So thank you, Mr. Fly, for making that appearance. Just curious to know more about, I guess, your earliest memory, your earliest recollection, and a little bit about your childhood and growing up, and just sort of things that you remember.
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I guess. Born in Mildura, Victoria, and I'd say my earliest memory was obviously where I lived in Mildura in 8th Street, and you know, the neighbours, visiting neighbours, the local kids. We had an oval across the road, just playing over there with the dogs under the sprinklers. We even made the TV and the news that particular time. We were out there. It was a stinking hot day, as Mildura is, and we were out there running around having a good old time, and a reporter happened to go past and took a photo. But that was probably my only claim to fame, or the only time I've ever... Well, no, I take that back. It's probably the second time I've ever been on TV. But I guess, you know, also visiting my relatives and my nana and pop, and you know, visits with my dad, and you know, going with my mum. She would make us costumes for our ballet classes, and you know, going with mum to when she was working, and you know, we'd play with the boss's kids and stuff. So we had a pretty active life as little ones, I suppose. And you know, life throws curveballs, and you know, my mum remarried, and you know, new dad, new lifestyle. You know, he was a teacher and principal, had to adapt to that, and as well as some new schools. So yeah, you know, met a lot of friends, and funnily enough, some of them I'm still friends with today. So, you know, early childhood memories can be just your friends who you make along the way. And, you know, moving to other towns as, you know, Dad got promotions and moved around. But, you know, going back and visiting my friends, you know, once a couple of times a year was always, you know, good fun. Always been part of my fond memories. That's probably my earliest childhood memories that I remember. Sorry, the dog's decided to join us. She wants to be a part of it.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that image of, you know, the kids playing on the front lawn and under the sprinkler. You know, to me, I mean, it probably happens all around the world. But for me, that's very much an iconic Australian image. Have you got that photo?
Yes, I have.
I was going to say, I'm sure you've showed me that photo.
I've got a clipping I've kept.
I'm sure I've seen that, because when you mentioned it, I had a flash of it, and I'm like, I've either just created that image in my head, or I'm sure that you'd actually showed me that picture. Yeah. Way cool. Yeah. But very much a classic, iconic setup. You know, the kids all playing together. You know, this is, bear in mind, obviously, we're Generation X. So we're pre-internet, we're pretty much pre-everything, you know, so it was, that's what you did, you know, that's
right. And I, you know, remember my parents worked pretty hard. You know, sometimes babysitters were an option, so you'd go along to the workplace as well. So, you know, taught you a lot of things, I suppose, how to adjust, adapt, and just get on with things, basically. You know.
What would be your absolute earliest memory if you were to go back as far as you can possibly go? What's one of all the...
Probably, I would say maybe 4 is probably my earliest memory. And that's, you know, playing with my friends, you know, children of my mum's friends, who, you know, we see regularly, you know, playing with them in sandpit, and probably kindergarten. You know, they're probably some of my earliest memories. Also, I was quite a wild child when I was little. I was a bit of an escape artist and used to take off a lot. You know, if I got told I couldn't go to the swimming pool or something, I'd just go and walk there, sort of thing. So I remember, you know, that, and cab driver picking me up and taking me home, because I was that regular that people would say, oh, there's Michelle again, walking, go pick her up, take her home again. But
and I do know the answer to this, but for the audience, please tell us why it was the cab driver had to pick you up.
Probably because I was only like 5 years old.
And you had run away from home,
again,
I believe, is the full story there.
Yeah, Mum wouldn't let me go to the swimming pool that particular day, so I decided, oh, well, I'll just walk myself. So, yeah, you know, it wouldn't be unusual for me to go to the neighbours next door and raid their cookie jar or lolly jar or something like that. Or we used to have a tree right next to our laundry, which was outside, and I'd be climbing the tree. I think Mum said the only time she had any peace and quiet from me was the day I fell off and sprained my ankle. She said, at least I knew where you were. And ironically, my earliest memories when it comes to TV is, you know, on a Sunday, having a bath, getting ready for bed, and sitting down and watching like the Goodies and Fantasy Island and Banana Splits, all that. That was, and Countdown, believe it or not. They were my iconic memories from early childhood as well. Classic
shows. And I'm sure people internationally would be familiar with Fantasy Island. Was also remade into a film, but you know, we're talking about the original TV show, which I'm going to say 70s.
Yeah, definitely.
Some of those were reruns, so they were like 60s, and we didn't see them until the 70s. Obviously, you know, we were born very late 60s, early 70s. For you, 1969. For me, 1971. So a lot of those shows had been around. Like, I remember growing up watching the likes of, you know, McHale's Navy, Bewitched, you know, I Dream of Jeannie, like Gilligan's Island, and some of those shows were already being rerun then. Like they were old shows, especially like McHale's Navy, Ernest Borgnine, and a lot of those shows were rerun by the time even we got to them. They'd been around for quite a while. So I think of them as 70 shows, but in some cases they're 60 shows or they're 50 shows. They're older than we thought. But yeah, and you made reference to Countdown. Again, absolutely iconic in Australia.
Absolutely. Yep.
Something that's we all take for granted, we know. But basically, it was kind of like the very early Australian version of like an MTV
bandstand or something.
Bandstand, yeah, exactly.
America.
It was basically a music show, predominantly Australian artists, but there was international artists did appear on the show as well. Shout out to Molly Meldrum, the host of the show, who would later end up as a guest on another iconic show that we grew up in the same era watching. Hey, Hey, It's Saturday. Yes. Shout out to Daryl and Ozzy. Daryl Summers, the host of the show, and of course Ozzy, his sidekick, who was actually a pink emu.
Ostrich? I'm not sure.
Ostrich? I think he was an ostrich.
I think he was an ostrich, but he really should have been an emu because that would be Australian.
Yeah, because being Australian, he would be an emu. But I think he was an ostrich.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Put it in the comments if people know for sure. But we'll have to look it up after this. But I think, he was. Actually, duh. It was Aussie Ostrich. Duh. I just carried on to that.
Yeah,
okay, cancel that. He was not an emu. He was definitely an ostrich. Should have been an emu being Australia.
Should have been an emu.
It's funny because I remember, going back to childhood memories, I remember watching that show religiously, and it started off as a Saturday morning kid show.
That's right.
Like, that was the one that you would get up and you would watch. There was obviously, all of the cartoons that we all grew up with. But that was actually I'm guessing it was live, possibly pre-recorded, but it was a show that you woke up and watched on a Saturday morning, and it was like Daryl and Ozzy, and actually talking like, okay, so Ozzy may or may not have been a puppet.
It was. Yeah.
But there was actually like a real voice. It was two people, interacting. And then they would, I'm just trying to think, they had cartoons in the middle of that, didn't they?
Yeah, there was cartoons.
There was cartoons and shows, and they would jump to as well as kind of the, the actual live part. But I guess the strange part was that it then switched format completely. Same show, still called Hey Hey It's Saturday, still on Saturday, obviously, still with Daryl and Ozzy, but ended up as a Saturday night show, changed from, having the audience of just being a kids show, changed over completely to end up as I guess more of a family format. Like there were, it was one of those shows where, there was no swearing on it. It was definitely a show that the whole family could sit down and watch together. Again, that was probably part of the success behind it in that it appealed to all age groups. There was a lot of innuendos, a lot of things that were aimed at adults that the kids wouldn't get, but there's still plenty of in there, like good wholesome entertainment that was in there for the kids that, it just appealed to both age groups. And it had, it had such I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head, but it had such a great run. It really became part of,
culture.
Oh, look, 100%. It truly iconic, and it was something that I think because we grew up watching it as kids, and then it became the Saturday night evening show, especially if you were young enough that you weren't going out, so you were anything from like a young kid right up to that 15, 16, 17, even watched it older.
Yeah.
But, into that age group, that's what you'd be doing on a Saturday night. You'd be sitting down watching that with a family. Yep. And what was it? It was like 3 hours long.
Yeah, I think it went for quite a while.
And it had like, a lot of
there's celebrities and bands and music and TV shows. It was a very big promotion for new artists, whether it's comedy or music. You know, you used to always be promoting their album, CDs or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Records back then, probably.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, 100%. It would have been, yeah. And that's where, like, you'd have Molly come on and he'd do his segment talking about what was happening internationally, because Molly was, you know, was hooked into the international scene very much. You know, he knew all the behind the scenes and all the goss. You know, then you'd have Blackman, who was like he did a lot of the voiceover stuff. He'd do a lot of the announcing. He was like upstairs in the control room.
The voice.
And he'd do like, what was it? He did the angel, you know, he did the angel. He'd be like, yeah, Daryl, that's right, Daryl. And I've gone blank. The
There's
legendary
Jackie as well.
Jackie, of course. Jackie, shout out to Jackie McDonald, who again, iconic, you know, someone that we grew up with, really funny, bounced incredibly well, not only off Daryl but off Ozzy. You know, that they work so well together.
And you had Wilbur Wilde and Red Simons.
Who like were the house band. They were like the house entertainment. Red Simons, of course, you know, famous for his role on the panel of they'd have like the live show.
He was the Kyle Sandilands.
Yeah, he was. He was before Kyle was even thought of. Yep. Like he was the guy that he was He
was like the Grinch.
He was very much so. He was like the guy that you love to hate, and was, you know, from everything I've ever heard, really a good guy. But he played the role of like the villain on the show. You know, they had the you know, like it was a variety show, so they'd have, you know, actual acts come on. Whether it was
Red Faces.
Yeah, Red Faces. Red Faces was the show. And, you know, he was Red Simons. So it was essentially, he was on every week. He was like the third one on the panel of three. And you could have anything from like genuinely talented people right through to people that were just got on there just for a laugh. Yeah. You know, they got drunk, come to the audience and gone, hey, I'm going to get up and do this, you know. And there was some stuff on there that you look back on now and it was, you know, not politically correct. But at the time, different times you could get away with it. We're talking now by this stage, I'm not sure exactly when it went to night TV, but I believe it would have been, if it was late 70s, I would have thought it was more early 80s. It was definitely at that stage of the game, it was more of like an 80s kind of a show where it was in the night format. But, you know, you'd have the famous saying, you know, gong him Red, because the act was so bad that he'd have to get up, and they had the gong and he'd gong, you know, once you got gong, that's it, you're out, you know. And I can remember like even some absolutely brilliant acts just appearing on Red Faces. Help me out. The name of the comedian that was on there, older guy, brilliant. He'd had a long career as both an actor and as a comedian.
Well, Murray Fields used
Murray
to be
Fields!
on it, and there was
he was
the
brilliant.
other comedian.
He'd have his wife come on there as well, Murray Fields, because I believe they were like old vaudeville era, like back to the travelling show days, and he was like the early days of Australian TV, and he'd come on and he'd do his joke, you know, the Murray Fields joke, and he'd have a yarn, which is like Australian for a classic sort of funny story. Who was the other comedian?
I can't remember. I can picture his face, but I can't remember his name.
We'll come back to it. If someone remembers, drop it in the comments. But yeah, I can't think of who else it was. I tell you a funny story more. We're getting into, I'm going to say mid-80s, maybe that 86 or 1987. Sylvester Stallone is in Australia. He's doing a promo. He appeared on the show and was like great on it. You know, like he was just a natural on the show. You know, naturally a funny guy, down to earth, you know, not afraid to take the piss out of himself and have a bit of a laugh. But I don't know if it was like an awards night or there was something going on. And Isla Fisher, who was only really, really early in her career at that stage, like I think she was, what was she in Home and Away?
Yes.
I think she was possibly still on Home and Away.
Well, I think it was Home and Away. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. No, I think it was. And she was only like early. So she was just starting to get known. She was really young at that stage, but just sort of starting to get well known. But I'm pretty sure she was still on Home and Away at that stage. And like, ended up with the benefit of hindsight. Super talented, super funny, super successful, like cracked it wherever she went. She's done all of the Hollywood films, like right up there with the best of them, and such a great representation of Australia. She's just on her success and how well she's done. But the point is, I remember her coming on the show, I think it was like the next week after Stallone had been on. And, everyone had obviously on the show had already heard the story of what happened. And, they kind of, so Isla, if anyone can find the clip, I'd love to see it. It's probably on YouTube. But they're like, oh, Isla, tell us about what happened at the awards night. Or it was probably more the after party, with Stallone. And she's like, oh, can't believe you brought it up. But someone might have had a few too many drinks and ended up being sick all over Sylvester Stallone.
Oh, no.
I know. And everyone's like, oh, how, like, was he cool? And they're like, no, he was fine. It was all good. It was like a bit awkward at the time. And, she was probably a little bit drunk and, probably didn't sort of realize too much. But yeah, funny story going back to
it's not kind of how you want to be remembered, but it's one way to be remembered if in hindsight, I suppose.
100%. Like even at the time, I'm like, oh my God, like, I would have been, still a teenager myself. And I'm like, oh, the poor thing, like classic, but oh my God. But yeah, obviously didn't hurt her career any. No. And, she, definitely went places and is still going places. But yeah, interesting. We kind of went down the path of from childhood and then going into that classic Australian show. Back to you and your memories and your childhood. Anything else that you remember really early days, those formative years that, like sort of stand out as memories?
Well, probably, I guess one of the things I remember a lot is obviously the Aussie way back in the 70s and the 80s. My grandparents lived in Swan Hill and my cousins also lived there as well, and we used to spend all our holidays in Swan Hill. And
famous gold town country.
Yeah, absolutely sovereign kind of town, I suppose. Got the pioneer settlement and the boat there as well, the pioneer settlement.
The paddle steamer.
And it wasn't so much, just visiting them. It was all of us kids in the neighbourhood. We used to all get together. We'd all go from morning. We'd be gone all day long, just about, and home again at dark. The classic, what everyone used to do back in the day. And we were all together in a group. Like sometimes there could be 10 to 20 of us, and we'd just find the most boring and insane things to just sort of get out and do, and go bike rides or go over to the islands or swimming in the river or whatever. But we just used to entertain ourselves all day long, and that was always something I was always enjoyed. Going to visit my grandparents and my cousins and all the people in the neighbourhood as well. We did that for years and years. I mean, obviously, as you grow up, people move on, sort of thing. But that was a highlight. And same as when I moved to, to Tura near Shepparton, or Harston, if you want to be exact. It's the same thing. We were on a hobby farm, but all the kids you get to meet on the school bus. It'd be nothing for us to all get together on our horses and go for horse rides, and we do things as a group, go camping, do all that sort of stuff. They were some of my best times. All my friends, and some of them are still around today, but they're my biggest memories and fun that I ever had. And we never did anything illegal or anything like that, but we all used to have fun and motorbike riding and bonnet riding, all those sort of crazy things. Would be nothing for me to come back from a weekend away covered in bruises, but geez, we'd have a ball. Some of the things, 3 on a motorbike, hooning up the fire trails and stuff like that. It was hanging off the back of a 4-wheel drive while we go up mountains. It was great.
Yeah.
That was my highlights as well, and friends with some of them still today. So yeah, they're my best highlights, and some of them were with my sister as well. We'd do stuff together. We had some joint friends that would get out there and every weekend catch up, sort of stuff. So yeah, they were probably my fondest memories.
And of course, family still in Tatura. Shout out Tatura, or Tat, as it's known locally, just out of Shepparton, which is probably more the well-known town. Little cameo there from Jax.
Yes.
Jax and Abby both hanging around.
Yep, definitely. Like something's up.
Just like Jax to make sure he gets on the camera and doesn't miss out.
Yes.
But yeah, Shepparton to Tatura, what is it, 20 minutes from Shepparton?
It's about 25 minutes from Shepparton, to Tatura.
And Shepparton probably more the well-known town in the area.
Yep.
Shepparton, of course, famous for...
it's what they call the food bowl. It's got all the major, food producers. You've got, your Ardmonas, your SPC, you've got Unilever, Tatura Milk, Campbell's, all the main food producing factories, the dairy industry, fruit, it was all there. So it was quite a thriving town. There's a lot of work and opportunities, especially in the big factories. So a lot of opportunities there.
And like you say, very much the food bowl, a lot of, good, hard-working, honest people around, the farming communities, people are your primary
your
producers.
Orchards,
Exactly. The orchards, your food producers, the people that literally are putting the food on our table from, from day one, from when we're young, we're eating like your
little fruit snack packs.
Exactly, Well, even kids' food, a lot of the, like the mushed up pears and all that sort of stuff,
There's not too many regional towns that have all of those kind of industries all in the one place or within a demographic, 50 k's away. So yeah, it was, and I worked at all of them pretty much. I've been from Ardmona and Bonlac, Nestle, all of those big companies. Unilever, worked for most of them over my years there. So I've definitely had a lot of great opportunities, and I guess in a roundabout way, it's led me to where I am today.
And so I guess, like going back, before even, you started working, so schooled entirely in that area, like primary school and high school?
I went to 4 primary schools. 2 of them were in Mildura, and the other 2, my stepfather got promoted and moved to different schools, so I went to a couple of other schools as well, and 2 high schools, which were, one was in Shepparton and one was in Mooroopna, which is between Shepparton and Tatura. Yeah. So did a bit of a cross section, but the high school in if I go back my primary school days, I think the highlight for me was when Mum married John, and we were at Nangelock, which was probably half an hour out of Mildura, very small town.
Nangelock, and right now everyone that's not Australian's going, what? Oh, that's right, Australia. I remember. They have all of those really weird names for places.
And they were my best times at the primary school there. That was, I don't think you'd ever get to experience that too much today. Being a regional school and everyone's, quite a community. And again, friends still there today that I keep in contact with. So probably my best memories were being at Nangelock, and then when it comes to high school, Mooroopna High was probably, or Mooroopna Second Good College as it is now, and I'm still in contact with all of them today as well. So they were probably my highlights of school. They were probably my best pick at all. So.
And it's funny because coming back to the very start of our conversation, we were talking about how you're not the person that wants to be on the camera or in front of the microphone.
No.
And yet from, everything that I know from talking to your family, talking to you, from photos, you were very much, you probably, I don't know, I wasn't there, I don't know that you were necessarily an extrovert, but you were definitely a lot more extroverted than what you are. And had that little bit more of a flair of the entertainer thing.
When I was little, I was quite the poser. I would, doing the ballet and tap dancing and all that sort of stuff. I was, it'd be nothing to see me posing in a photo, pulling a face or doing something. But, as anything in life, things change, and whatever experience you have over the years as well, some things can affect you in different ways. So I've kind of gone from being that flamboyant child, I suppose, to maybe not so much today. But I mean, I think one of the things about our relationship is Craig knows his inner child very well, and you also bring that out in me to find my inner child and have a bit of fun and let go. So I think we kind of have that reverse effect. But I think for me, I need to probably tap into my inner child a lot more than what I do. But it's sometimes easier said than done. But I am what I am, I guess.
The classic Popeye saying, I am what I am.
Exactly.
But it's so true. It's such a good point. I think that we all start off as a child, and we have that natural play. You
carefree,
go and
no.
Yeah, it's a natural thing. Kids just love to play and make believe and pretend and build cubbies, build forts, and play the way children do. And then we hang on to that for as long as we can. But we all get to that point where just things become more serious, and we start to learn about responsibility, the realities of life. And then of course, when we actually do leave school, and bills and adulting, as they call it, from what I've heard, I honestly don't know. But to your point, you're so right, is that we do have to try and hang on to that inner child. Even as we become adults, I don't care how old you get, it's still so important to hang on to that. Looking at the yin and yang thing, and how our dynamic, we very much balance each other out. We've often discussed this before, in that, I have tried to, help you I guess unearth. It's not like you're redeveloping it. It's always there, but just to unearth and highlight the importance of tapping into that inner child. You're naturally a fun person. You're naturally someone who loves to have a laugh and loves to see the lighter side of things. But the other side of the coin is, I'm probably can be a little too much of a joker, and sometimes I may be not serious when I do need to be. But again, you've helped me balance that out and tried to, just pick your time and pick your moments. But we very much do balance each other out from that perspective.
It's funny that we can be so opposite in some things, yet very similar in most things as well. So it's kind of a weird dynamic, I guess, how you could be sort of very different and still be very similar.
100%, yeah. And look, I remember Bono, seeing him on an interview somewhere, and they were talking about some of the work that he was doing. So I'm going back post 9/11, early 2000s, maybe around that sort of 2005, 2006 stage, and someone was saying, you've done a lot of stuff with George W. Bush, US president. and they're like, your politics don't necessarily line up, but how is it that you're able to do that? And I can remember Bono saying to whoever was interviewing him, it's important to understand that you can connect on just one point, just one point of connection. And that's all you need to be able to have that, that ability to connect and move forward and work on things.
Yeah, well, it's the same with, meeting people from different age groups and different work backgrounds or, nationalities or whatever. Sometimes there's just that one thing that you do connect on, but it wouldn't be someone you may have sought out previously or... I remember in a couple of my workplaces, there was one lady who was my mum's age, and her and I did heaps of stuff together, and I was only in my early 20s, and she was my mum's age, but her and I would just gel and we'd just do stuff together all the time and, socialise outside of work as well. And then I also remember when I worked at Bonlac, he was my grandfather's age, but he and I got along so well. I'd visit him when he was doing his steam trains, or he'd help me with some stuff around my house or whatever. But, him and his wife were lovely. But it's amazing how you can connect with people no matter what age group and where they're from. It's bizarre how the world works. It's quite interesting, to say the least. But... I've just had that ability to connect with different people, no matter who they are, basically. You just got to, if they're a decent person, you got my vote.
Yeah. But it's so true. Like you say, just finding that point of connection, finding that one thing that can spark a whole relationship, a whole friendship, or even just... a whole interaction, it can be just you're standing in line with someone at the supermarket and just something happens or something you see, or, it could be a song or whatever it is, just that one little point of connection, and it's amazing. And sometimes it's not even just that person that you connect with. I don't know how many people I know, like even till this very day, where I've met them through someone else, friendships that have led to friendships. And again, it just comes back to that one point of connection that you had with one person at one time. And then you've either become, connected or friends with them on some level. And that can be like a long-term friendship. Or they've introduced you to someone else. And then they've become a long-term... I know, personally, for me, examples where I've met one person, I've gone and done a course or whatever the case may be. They've introduced me to, their flatmate, and then I've met someone else, and then I've met someone else. It's amazing how that can work, and you can form... like lifelong friends that become like lifelong family, Amy is the perfect example, like meeting her parents, who I met from a guy that her dad worked with, who was the housemate of a housemate of their friend that I did a course with, and it's like, and like Amy's is essentially family, people that you can just, and again, just from happy to have met that right person at the right time, and how, that flow on effect, it's really bizarre. So, I guess the lesson there is that sometimes you just have to be open. You just have to have that open heart. You just never know, what that connection's going to lead to. Even if it's not with that person, it could be someone they introduce you to, or something that comes on from there. And I think, in your case, like you say, growing up in that, more of a rural area where, they are smaller communities, so there is more of a likelihood that the people that you go to school with, you're going to know through sport, and
well, that's right.
have the farm next door, and those kinds of things. And
Yep.
as you've told me before, if especially on smaller farms and hobby farms, if a family was going away, you'd help out and look after their farm and look after their animals, and they do the same thing for you. And it was a real sense of community, which for me has been awesome to learn about, because I've grown up more in that classic suburban, like outer suburbs kind of upbringing. I guess for most of my early childhood, I guess my more formative years was that classic, growing up in Victoria in the outer suburbs kind of an upbringing. So to learn more about that, I mean, look, as I got older, I spent some time, moved all around Australia, but spent some time in Darwin in the Northern Territory, which was more, I guess, more rural and more of that experience. Not that we're on a farm or anything, but again,
it's different from the suburbs, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Melbourne or Sydney, it's a little, it's kind of like Brisbane, I guess, kind of regional-ish.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, and even then it's changed. Like, I remember as a kid, like Brisbane was considered to be more, I guess, of a regional area, whereas now it's like a thriving capital city right up there with your Sydney, Melbourne. It's the classic Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, It's definitely very much changed. But, it's been great for me to learn more about your upbringing and your childhood growing up on farms and in that rural area, growing up riding horses to your friends and that sort of stuff. Like, that's just fantastic. That must have been just...
Yeah, no, we did. We had a ball.
Just great to grow up. I'm glad you found the microphone, Jax. We'd hate you to have missed out.
Yeah.
Jax, of course, the half Irish wolfhound, half bull Arab.
Half human as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Shh. Go on.
And he's probably just showing up enough that people can see, but he's 65 kilo, which is like 2.2, so 65 is 130. He's probably about 140 pound, so he's a big fella. And of course his sidekick in life, Abby, his sister, the crazy pit bull. He's got a heart of gold, but is a little bit on the crazy side.
Just a little. Yep.
Tell us more about, leaving high school, it's your very first job.
So we did work experience in year 11, and I was working at a real estate agency just on the reception, and I think I was going back to do my HSC back then.
Which is like a year 12.
Which is what, VCE or something?
VCE now, it was matric, essentially the end of your high school.
And the day before I started at HSC, they asked me if I wanted a permanent job. So I said, yeah, working, getting paid, going to high school. I'm like, yeah. So I started working at a real estate agency as a receptionist for a little bit.
Yeah, very cool.
And then after that, thankfully for me, one of our neighbours, she was the HR manager at Amaroo, and approached me about a job as a junior clerk, and so I took that, and that was the start of my career working for some of the big companies. Kind of progressed from there.
Which Amaroo took over SPC? That's right. How it worked?
Yep.
So SPC, like everyone would know, I mean, as kids, we know it from like spaghetti. SPC, baked beans and spaghetti. So like your tin baked beans and your tin spaghetti.
And, your peaches.
Peaches, pears. I remember like both the Amaroo and the SPC pears, the tin pears, like so sweet. And then you could drink the pear juice.
Yep.
Remember that as a kid, loved it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like iconic Australian companies that are still around till what form are they in now? Is it Ardmona SPC? What's the...
I think they might be SPC Abmona, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Or that could be just under SPC these days, I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. But as with a lot of companies, they've taken over each other and mergers
Yeah,
and,
that's merged,
and
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the dog wants to go outside.
Okay. We'll pause there.
Yeah, I think so.
Dogs have been... We've watered the horses.
Yep.
And back with the water that has just magically appeared on the shot. So following on your early career, you've obviously left school, relatively fond memories of your childhood, of your primary and high school. You've now started in your first career. How has that played out in terms of like one job leading into the next, sort of, I guess, what's the range of different jobs that you've had?
They're probably not so much a range, they're sort of still around the same sort of industry. So when I took on the job as a junior clerk at Ardmona, I was lucky to get promoted. I think I might have been 18 months in or something. A position became available in the purchasing department. So I was working in the purchasing department at Ardmona for about 8 years, and met some amazing people, great friends, a lot of experience. That's back in the old school days when suppliers used to take you out for long lunches and go on hot air balloon rides, box seats to the football and the tennis, that sort of stuff. Back in the old school days.
Yeah.
And I kind of loved working in that industry, and it was very diverse. It wasn't, I could be ordering stationery up to ingredients to nuts and bolts and steel. It was very, very diverse. And I did that for 8 years, and some friends had moved and gone on to bigger jobs and different states, whatever. So I decided it was time for a bit of a sea change, and a friend, she'd already moved over to Western Australia, so I decided to move over to WA. So
Western Australia, for anyone not from Australia.
Yeah. So we both packed up our cars, drove to Adelaide, and put our cars on the train, and pretty much spent a 24-hour overnight train ride through the middle of Kalgoorlie to Perth. And
Perth, of course, the capital of Western Australia.
Yeah. So we were in suburbia there.
Which is only, like 3,000 kilometres?
Yeah, it's a long way when it comes to driving, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was doing kind of like payroll and inventory management, working for a transport company. So still using some of my purchasing skills, over the last 8 years.
And how old are you at this stage? Like shifting over to Western Australia?
Mid-20s, probably, mid to late 20s. And, decided to do that. I was probably there for maybe a year. My friend Tanya and I, we were going to do some travelling around Australia, but she was a chef and she got offered a job working at Jindabyne in the snowfields for that year. So, I ended up, I got offered through one of my suppliers when I worked at Ardmona. They offered me a job as a purchasing officer, purchasing and sales back then, working for an engineering manufacturing company. So motors and V-belts and bearings, all that sort of stuff. So I ended up moving back home, and I'd had a house that I'd rented out, so I moved back into my house. So I was probably 25 when I bought my first house. So
yeah, wow. And that's an incredible achievement.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I was pretty proud.
Testament to your hard work.
Yeah. Did bit of looking after my younger brothers and staying at home, and was able to save some money thanks to Mum and Dad.
And of course, speaking of which, shout out to your brothers and your sisters. So 2 brothers, Matt and Chris, and your sister Chrissy.
Yep.
Shout out to them.
Shout out, yes.
And, I guess that's got to be a great thing in itself, growing up with that many siblings as well, like having the benefit of having the 2 brothers and a sister as well.
Yeah.
Obviously apart from, your friends and your schoolmates and that sort of thing, but just having that immediate family. Look, I consider myself to be incredibly lucky. It was only the 2 of us, me and my brother, who's an absolute legend. Shout out to Scotty. But, very fortunate to have even a sibling, to have a brother to grow up with. But, to grow up with 2 brothers and a sister, that must have been just an awesome opportunity.
It had its challenges. I can't.
Of course.
I mean, my sister and I used to fight a lot when we were younger, but we're close now.
Incredibly
We're
close.
older.
Get along like a house on fire, as you do with them all. Yeah.
Hey, come on. And I mean, there's an age gap between, my brothers and I. They were from, my stepfather. But we have a pretty good relationship as well. So I'm very, very lucky in that respect. So, yeah.
And then, so you've moved back. You've come back to where you grew up.
Yep.
What did that look like at the time then? So, same career, same industry.
So still sort of in the purchasing industry. I think I was lucky that I guess I'd kind of didn't see much in the way of, going forward in that position. And I applied for a job at Bonlac at the time, and that was working as a production clerk.
So Bonlac doing...
So Bonlac were, I think they're now called Fonterra, so they do powdered milk and, cheese, that sort of, those dairy industry products.
Yeah.
And so I worked at Bonlac for 4 years. Unfortunately, that was around the time we had really bad drought around the area, and unfortunately, a lot of the dairies,
tough time.
Yeah, a lot of them had to fold. They couldn't afford the feed, the water. There was no water, so it was really bad times. So they kind of, I worked in the milk powder section, so they sort of closed that down, and it pretty much became just a cheese making factory. So.
Okay.
I was a bit devastated at the time. I'm like, love this job or whatever. But I was lucky that I took a contract job working at Nestle. And that was in exports, believe it or not. And luckily for me, that became a permanent job. And so I was doing exports of milk powder and milk products all over the world.
Because literally, a large multinational company, probably still one of the largest companies in the world today.
Yeah.
I'm only guessing they'd have to be in the top 50 or top 100. They'd be.
Yeah, well, you look at, the milk powder, the tin powder for baby formula.
Yeah.
They did all those sorts of things, and then of course don't forget the chocolate.
The chocolates, iced teas, all of those.
More. Nesquik and condensed milk, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, so I work, and I also was able to assist in the purchasing side of it. So I've still had my finger in the pie with the purchasing. So I did that for 4 years, and again, it was like a 10-year drought. Still had an impact, and same thing. The milk powder production pretty much ceased. So I kind of like, okay, here we go again. It's like, oh, wow, two businesses that sort of really struggled at the time, but testament to them, they're still going today, still happening in those regional towns still.
And look, it highlights, it highlights how tough those communities and how tough those industries are. droughts and for primary producers, for anyone that's producing food and living and working off the land, it's tough anytime in any country, even in good season, even with rains. But I mean, a drought in Australia is, I think, particularly harsh. It's a particularly tough time. And I know from, like Shauno, who was one of my best friends who owned a sheep farm, out at Gaduga, which is, basically Lightning Ridge, opal community, opal mining town. He was a fair way out of town, but, just from some of the stories from him, they would go from, having one of the worst droughts in history into some of the worst flooding in history. I remember one time them actually they couldn't even get off the property for 3 months. Their food was being helicoptered in. And, it's back to what you were saying, such a testament to those people in those communities living off the land, because there's, one thing with Australia, like
we go from
where
extremes.
fire, flood, drought, the sunburnt country, the land of sweeping plains, and we do have it all, and it really is a testament to just how tough those people are, So back to your point, it's really tough, those droughts, and for the people and the companies to be able to survive those times, incredible.
So, and then I ended up going back to Shepparton for work again. Worked for Pental.
Pental, what did Pental do?
Well,
I know the company name.
Used to be Pental Soap back in the day.
Yeah.
Velvet soap. Used to have them in the box.
Of course.
But they were quite diverse. They did Jiffy firelighters. They bought a lot of brands.
Jiffy firelighters.
Yeah, they did a lot of brands. So, a lot of fabric softeners and a lot of soap products for all the factories soap products for the factories as well as the hotels.
They weren't Jiffy Donuts, were they?
No.
No.
Jiffy firelighters, like starting and stuff. But
Jiffy Donuts were like the big, giant sugar jam-filled donuts that I remember having as a kid, ordering from like the tuck shop, the canteen. So, different Jiffy, but just a great product in its own right. Nothing like a Jiffy donut.
Yeah, so I was doing purchasing and inventory there for a while. And, then my biggest career move came, and that was working for Unilever, and talk about coming back around 360 degrees. When I was, mum remarried, my stepfather being my principal and teacher, he was my boss. He was my manager. So
shout out to John.
And like back in primary school, and same working at Unilever, there was no special privileges. I had to probably, if nothing, work harder than everybody else to prove that I deserved to be there because of my experience. It's not because of who I knew.
And if anything, I'm just going to jump in there. If anything, we've spoken about this before, and I've compared it kind of to like Frank on Blue Bloods.
Yeah.
And his approach to his kids. Not only is there no special treatment, it's in fact the opposite.
Yep.
You're actually held to a standard much higher than what every other student in that school or in that class would have been. You were, whether John realised it or not, you were held to a much higher standard. So what he expected of you was far beyond what he would have expected of anyone else. So there was definitely no special treatment. There was no privileges. It was
But I mean, I think that made me a better employee and a better worker because of it.
Yeah.
Knowing that I got there on my own merits and my experience and where it led me to. So I was very lucky, and I was lucky enough to, promote myself anew from materials planning to mixing planning to actual production planning to being a supervisor. It led me, 10 years I was there.
Yeah.
Made some amazing friends that are long life friends, and
People that you still know to this very day and keep
Yep.
in touch with. And
Yep. They were. That was a great place to work. I mean, boy, we had some challenges working there. We had some. I mean, obviously, John retired a couple of years into me working there, and we've had some challenging managers in the time, and some really good ones at the same time, and lots of bumps. But because we were such a good team, we all respected each other and had a good work ethic, and it was the people that kept you coming back every day, not so much working for the business. It was, supporting each other and getting through some of those tough times. But yeah, they were some of my best years working there. So.
And that's a classic example of where, regardless of if you have good management or bad, if you have good leaders or bad, that ability to form a team, even if it's not because of anything good that and I'm not saying they did or didn't, but just generally speaking, just a great team, you do, it creates that dynamic where, even if it's only in work hours, you're a fantastic team and able to produce some great results. In a lot of cases, you then form friendships and, relationships with people outside of work hours as well. But it's amazing what you can learn and how it develops you as a person, just being parts of those teams. I've often heard you talk about life lessons and experiences, things that have been quite formative, even as an adult, where a lot of those things that have stuck with you and life lessons and examples of things that have happened, that you carry with you and that actually have a really big impact on you.
I mean, we can look back at it now and laugh at some of the things, but at the time, living some of the experiences that we went through, it's a wonder some of us didn't have nervous breakdowns. It was some of it was just, some of the management style of some of the leaders that we had, and just the toxicity of some places that you work in, and it's like it does have an effect on you, affects your self-esteem, and you start to doubt your abilities, all those sorts of things. But it also makes you stronger as well. But it can also feed things like anxiety and doubt. Then it also, in the same breath, it also makes you think, I'm not going to take that shit from anyone anymore.
Yeah.
I've dealt with it once before, I'll be damned if I'm going to do it again, sort of thing. But
and it's fucked the impact that they can have on your life and on people's sense of well-being and of self-worth.
That's right.
Yep.
And that, as you know, self-worth is a big issue for me, and feeling like you always have to sort of prove and go above and beyond. So when you sort of go through those times, it does have that impact. But the problem is, you don't realise it doesn't affect you and your work colleagues. It goes and flows on to your home and friendships and relationships, because it has an impact there as well. So to me, I find it very hard to find a good leader, team leader,
definitely,
or a manager,
definitely,
or someone who lets you. John was good in that he allowed you to think for yourself and have initiative and all that, but there is a lot of management styles that doesn't allow you to do all those sorts of things, and make mistakes, or have initiative and think for yourself and put ideas forward. Some just like to keep you down, keep you pigeonholed in at this sort of level, and a lot of the time it's their own insecurities of
100%.
Maybe outshining them a little bit, But the idea of a good leader is you got to have that ability that you don't need to know everything that goes on. You just got to trust that your team knows what they're doing, and you're there to guide them if they need it. But there's I think I can only count on probably one hand how many good leaders I've ever, or managers I've worked with.
100%.
The rest of them have just been subpar,
Yeah,
to say the least.
definitely, yeah.
And that's one of the things, if ever, you know, do my own business or something, is that I want to be a good leader, a good team leader, and encourage and support my team.
Yeah.
But well, maybe one day I'll get that opportunity.
And as I've said to you, I've seen many examples where you've just naturally taken on that leadership role, even though you're formally not a supervisor or not a manager. But in a lot of cases, people have gravitated to you because you do put people before yourself, whether that's good or bad. In some cases, it can be either. But you are the sort of person that will genuinely put, you know, what's best for someone ahead of your own needs. You've never been ruled by your insecurities, and you know, I've seen plenty of examples where people have gravitated naturally towards you, and in my mind that makes you a leader because you've got those abilities, you've got that emotional intelligence, you've got that ability to be a leader for people without having to be a boss, without, you know, relying on the hierarchy itself. And that's, you know, very admirable. But yeah, like 100%, how many examples can you count of people that you just go like, they're just a great person?
You and I have experienced ourselves.
So many times, unfortunately, you know.
I mean, at the time, they were horrific times.
Yeah.
But we look back at it now and we just laugh because it is just so insane how we were treated, or and the things that they did, and it's like, holy crap.
And you know, like when you were talking before about, you know, different managers that you'd had, you know, the term that springs to mind is that baptism of fire. It's like where you become closer to people because of tough circumstances or tough leaders that you've been forced to deal with, and yet it can actually make people stronger. It's not the ideal way to form good teams, but you know, it's that thing of sometimes under pressure diamonds are formed.
Yeah, I used to sort of get the nickname counsellor, but and I thought that was something I wanted to do at some point. I kind of explored it, but you know, life gets in the way, and sometimes study's not necessarily priority at the time, but maybe one day I'll revisit it again.
But again, you know, like I say, you do take on that role naturally, whether you are, you know, formally working as a counsellor or not. You do take on that role, and you do have a great ability, you know, like I saw it today, even just, you know, with your family, you just have that natural ability. I've always said that your spirit animal is like the owl, you know, you're like the wise owl, and you do have that quality that means that people, A, do gravitate towards you, and B, you have that natural, nurturing, caring, I guess, empathy. You know, you do have that ability to genuinely care about people, and I think that taps into what you're saying, that kind of role of being a counsellor, even if it's not, you know, technically your job. You know, and I see it all the time in you. It's such an admirable quality where people are drawn to you and, you know, do listen to your advice, and you give genuine advice on what you think is best for them or best in that situation.
I try to see all perspectives rather than my own view, or you know, there's always two sides to a story.
Yeah.
So,
and you're great for doing that with me too. You know, I know that, again, coming back to that yin yang thing, is that there's so many times where, I mean, look, it's very easy to just see our own perspective, and you'll say to me, hey, well, what about that? And I'll be like, yeah, no, you're right, 100%. Yeah, I didn't see it that way. I didn't even think of that. But now that you've said it, yeah, 100%.
And that's the other thing. I tend to look into the, you know, further out. You're more here in the now, and that's good in that we both have to flip it around and do that as well. Look at the here and now, and also look at, don't worry about what's going to happen in the future in some instances, but then at the same time you've got to look at, you know, 1 or 2 steps ahead of what could happen if you did this. Or
And it's funny, I don't know if I told you this, but I was only talking to someone the other day about you, and I was saying that generally I can sort of see about 2 steps ahead in most cases, whereas you tend to see 5 steps ahead. You know, that's probably the difference between us. I can see a couple of steps ahead, whereas, you know, you can see that sort of 5 steps ahead.
That might be my planning brain.
100%, yeah. That's again probably that left brain, right brain.
Well, and my planning experience, you know, that's kind of what I had to do, is project and forecast, you know, what's going to happen in the future and trends and stuff. So I think it flows into my personal life as well.
Yeah. And that's a good point all of its own. Like it's good because obviously the personal traits that we have, we take into our job, and then sometimes it works the other way, where those traits can actually carry over into our personal lives, and you know, they can help form who we are as well, our ways of thinking and those kinds of things. Yeah. I think it's good that, you know, I mean, one of the common themes based on what you've said and also from knowing you is kind of how you've sort of gravitated towards purchasing, gone away, done other things. I guess one of the great things about purchasing too is that it goes across so many different industries, so that you've worked in, you know, like, you know, food, dairy, you've jumped over to like the meat industry, chemical industry, you know, all
Council.
you've so many different industries where you've carried those skills. So it's something that you know, found your way into from an early age, and then it's paid such dividends. Even when you've gone into different industries that were totally different, you know. Your time working in the entertainment industry, for example, there's a lot of skills where you've still carried over that ability to be very logical and have that process and systems and planning kind of approach to things, which is fantastic. And again, for me, like, you know, in my previous time in the entertainment industry, having more, I guess, that creative side, and then pairing with you who's got that systems, process, goals, outcome side, like the amount of things that we were able to achieve, again, because of the things that we think the same on, and then the things that we see from a totally different perspective as well. You know, it's paid great dividends for us too.
Well, it's probably unusual that, you know, sometimes husband and wives working together, we actually sort of enjoy doing that sort of thing, whereas a lot of people would be like, oh my God, I couldn't think of anything worse than working with my partner.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many people have said that to us too. Like, how do you guys go? Like, you spend all day together working. And
we worked together in the real estate, had their own business in the real estate, then we had the GTE and those sorts of things. So
dabbled in so many different things and so many different industries. And being able to do it, you know, regardless of the industry, we've been able to successfully navigate it. You know, working for ourselves, we'd spend 12 hours working in our own business and then come home and spend the rest of our day together as well. And all weekend and you know. But, it's interesting. Like previous relationships wouldn't have been the case at all. I don't think I could have. But, No, and that's, you know, that's certainly true for both of us. So it's a testament to who we are as a couple and where we're at as people, you know, and the incredible relationship that we have, that we're able to do that, to even do this like we're doing here now, you know.
You
like
would have thought you'd be able to get me onto a podcast.
100%, yeah, and you're so good.
No.
But, you know, just that ability to work together and to be a team and to just, you know, like we always say, to have each other's backs. It's just good to know that we've always got each other's backs, no matter what it is we're doing, you know.
I think you do push me out of my comfort zone a lot.
Oh, that's good.
So
and look, thank you for saying that. And I do try and push myself out of my comfort zone. I know that, it's like they say, like
I know,
nothing.
but you never show that you're out of your comfort zone. You've got, I don't know whether that's you tapping into your acting skills. It's all calm and, jokes, whatever, but maybe underneath it all there's a little bit of, the duck in the water.
Well, I was just going to say, it's funny because, again, like you're reading my mind,
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say it goes back to that classic saying from one of my favourite all-time films, Convoy, The Rubber Duck. Chris Christopherson, we're only listening to some of his music today with The Highwayman. That classic saying of, like, being like the rubber duck. It's like on the surface, cool, calm, collected. And underneath the water, like paddling like a motherfucker, you know? It's that whole thing. And I guess that was literally the very first film I ever saw at the drive-in, Convoy. It was one of the first films I ever saw, generally speaking, but it was one of the first films I saw, and literally the first film I saw at the drive-in, and it sticks with you. But that lesson of the rubber duck, of just like, and it's not pretending. It's not like, oh my God, like I'm losing it. But just still trying to act all cool, calm, and collected. It's in a crisis situation or in any situation, it's like, breathe, focus on what you've got to do.
You seem to be able to back yourself, probably a little bit more.
Yeah, and look, it's
self-confidence.
It is, but it's something you practice that too. And I can remember so many times where, probably even more when I was younger, of just going, this is a tough thing I'm going into, and if nothing else, it'll just be like me and my, like my ticker, my heart, my experiences, my brain, whatever, I'll just use whatever I've got in that situation to the best of my ability. And I can remember telling myself that even at a quite young age. It's like, I don't know how this is all going to go, and this is probably going to be tough, and I'm, I don't know, I'm going to be probably out of my depth, but at the end of the day, I'll just, whatever I've got now, whatever I know, whatever I've experienced, I'll carry that with me, and I'll just give it all I've got and just do whatever I can. But I can remember there's a famous quote from, again, Bono from U2, saying something along the lines of, if you feel like you're out of depth, if you feel like you're over your head, then you're probably in the right place.
Okay.
And not always. Like, I'm not talking about that sense of overwhelm or that sense of anxiety, but I guess that place of, like, if it feels a little challenging or it feels a little uneasy, then you're probably in the right place or on the right track, and there is a very firm distinction between that and just being like totally overwhelmed and out of your depth. No one should be in that place, which again, you sort of got to fall back on your instincts of, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Does this not feel right? And if you ask yourself that question and answer, no, I'm not, then pack your shit up and get out of there, because you're not in the right place. But if you're like, this is a bit challenging, but it's all good, but it's challenging, you're probably in the right place. You're probably doing the right thing. There's a lot of cliches and a lot of famous quotes that sort of float around exactly about that very thing. But it's just like that. Nothing good ever came from being in your comfort zone, from doing that safe thing, from being in the same place. You and I have often spoken about people that are too afraid to it's like the Matrix, to take the red pill, blue pill, to step out of the comfort zone, to and that's cool. Like, for some people need that safety and security, and that's cool. But it is such a great lesson for anyone, be they young or old, to challenge yourself, to not be afraid to go, this is going to be really challenging, this is going to be tough, but to step up and do it anyway. It's that classic quote, feel the fear and do it anyway.
A lot of people don't push themselves into that situation. Sometimes it's circumstance or, outside forces that sort of gives them that little push, and that's when sometimes you realise you can do it. But a lot of people don't voluntarily step up to do that kind of thing, and I think before I was one of those who pretty much, as I said, circumstance or, outside forces pushing me to do more and step up. And of course, when you do, you find that, maybe it wasn't so bad after all, but I certainly probably wouldn't have gone out of my way to put myself in that situation. But I think that was back then. Now I may do a little bit more, but I think I also find as I get older, I sort of don't want all the drama and all that sort of thing. And I start to look at, not so much what would be my dream job or whatever. My dream job would be not to be doing the job at all, basically. But it's more, what interests me. And they're the kind of things I've always struggled with. What are my interests? What am I passionate about? I kind of look at myself and go, geez, you're so boring sometimes,
Which you're not.
Yeah.
That's one of those, I guess, things you're projecting on yourself because you're so not.
Yeah.
You're one of the most interesting people I know, but you are very hard on yourself. But it's.
Yeah. But I've got to sit down and have a think about all the things. I used to have a book of all the things I wanted to do and interests and stuff, and I have to drag that out again just to remind myself, and maybe it's time to start doing some of those things.
That's great. Yeah. Well, again, speaking about challenges, I give you that challenge. Pull that out and let's look through it. Let's revisit some of those things. But again, like credit where credit's due, and you also have to acknowledge the things you've done and the things you've achieved. And like I say, I know that at one stage, for example, you were considering the path of actually being a counsellor for people. And in many ways, as I mentioned just a short time ago, you actually are. And you regularly fulfill that, whether it's like with friends, with your family, with work colleagues. You do have that natural. And I only mentioned to you the other day, I think you would be really good in coaching because you do have that ability. I was only with talking to someone the other day that I do hope to have on the show at some stage, who's actually a really interesting person who I was listening to speak, in a talk about coaching. And, they were saying the example of coaches, like, for example, I think it was the example of Federer's coach, I think was the example he used. And he's like, Federer's tennis coach can't beat Federer in a game of tennis. Like in a game of tennis, Federer will kill him all day, every day, up and down the court. But when it comes to coaching Federer in how to be a great tennis player, like no one can stand next to the guy or girl. I'm not sure exactly who the coach is, but, and it's that exact same thing with coaching. It's not necessarily about being the best person at that particular skill or job or role or sport or whatever it is, but it's having that ability to bring the best out in people. That's essentially what the job is. And I think that's something you do anyway, naturally, is that ability to bring the best out in people.
The idea of doing coaching and doing all that mentoring or whatever, it does appeal, but then at the same time I'm like, I'm not a real huge fan of public speaking, that sort of thing. But, there's different ways of doing different things.
100%.
It doesn't have to be a big audience.
100%. I was just about to say that.
Sort of stuff,
it can be one-on-one.
Maybe.
It can be online. It can be virtual. It can be just in written form. It can be pre-recorded.
It may be one of those things I do, as I sort of look into getting into retirement or something, I don't really want to wait until retirement to start doing all those things. But there's a lot of food for thought. Sometimes it's all a bit overwhelming, just trying to think of, time ticking, what are you going to do with your life, blah, blah, blah. So just got to sit back
It's
and have
that
a
old
think.
story, what's the best way to eat an elephant? Like one piece at a time. I'm a classic.
Ideally not to eat one at
True.
all.
Yeah,
but
don't eat elephants. Note to everyone, do not eat elephants. But, it's such a great saying in that, it's breaking things down into those small pieces. And look, I'm a classic for it. I tend to look at things very much big picture, you know, and it can make things very easily to seem overwhelming. And it's a good reminder for everyone, myself especially, that, you know, it is important to just sometimes break those things down, look at the very next thing that's in front of you. And I know they teach, you know, like the Special Forces guys, that sort of thing. Shout out to the Special Forces, you know, be they in Australia or any of our allies, you know, United States, Great Britain, any of our allies. But it's that thing of just focus on what's in front of you right here, right now, that next step. You know, you hear the likes of like your Dave Goggins and, you know, some of the Special Forces guys, and they're like, you're on a 300-kilometre march, you know, with all the gear. Don't think about that 300 kilometres or 300 miles. Think about the next step, and then the next step after that, and then the next step after that. Think about the next 5 minutes and just getting through that, and then the next 10 minutes, and then the next hour, you know, literally just the next step in the process. It's such a great lesson, and one, like I say, it's more of as much of a reminder to myself as anyone. It's that don't get overwhelmed, you know, and it's easy to say, but it's just looking at the smaller steps and breaking it down, controlling the things that you can control, not focusing on the things that are beyond your control, you know, and just going, what's right in front of me? What can I control in the here and now? You know, such a good lesson for everyone, really.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that's a good point that, you know, we look at of just not being overwhelmed by making things too big, and, you know, like you say, whether it's you know, coaching in whatever form or doing whatever it is that you want to do, of just finding a way to make it. You know, sometimes we go, I don't want to be a coach, like you said, because I don't want to do public speaking, but there's so many different avenues and so many different ways of doing things, especially now, like with the internet and the ability to do things online. And, you know, now that we're such a certain way down the track when it comes to these things, they become so developed now with the advent of AI, and with a lot of apps where you don't actually have to know how to do a certain thing. You might decide, hey, I want to do this thing, and there's apps that can do all the legwork for you. You know, it's such a great time. It provides such great opportunity, you know, to just to be able to do those things. And I say that, like, you know, it's great to remind ourselves, but it's also a good lesson for anyone that's listening, you know, that there's just so much opportunity there. Sometimes we may not see it. Sometimes it's like, you know yourself, sometimes you do one thing and it leads to another thing, to another thing, to another thing. You know, like just us being here right now is a classic example of it, you know, in that I'd started off as an actor, wanting to be an actor, you know, and like I was never great. I loved it, had a ball, learnt so much professionally, but about myself, you know, the Socrates thing of know thyself, learnt so much about myself. And then like the acting led to like the voice acting and voiceover work, which in a roundabout kind of a way has then led me back to this. You know, and this is the podcasting. This is not even the first episode. This is literally the pilot. You know, this is us having a taste of it. But, you know, this is something that I really want to do. Something, you know, coming back to talking about the things that you want to do. This is something I'm super passionate about and really want to give a red hot go at, you know, something that I'm going to love doing, but something that I probably wouldn't have just gone, hey, I want to be a podcaster. I want to do podcasting. But steps.
Yeah, well, I mean, podcasting's a relatively newish thing as well. So, I mean, it was never something we thought about. I mean, it was people talking on YouTube or, you know, those sorts of things. You know, podcasting's a whole new thing all on its own. So yeah.
I'm actually halfway through writing down something at the moment that talks about kind of my journey into podcasting, and this is perhaps might be a good point to raise, in that probably more so when I was younger, I absolutely loved the idea of being a radio announcer, and big shout out to, someone I'm a big fan of, Mick Malloy, who, for anyone international, is a famous Australian entertainer, comedian, actor,
DJ, host.
Yeah. Like, jack of all trades. It's done a little bit of everything.
Football.
Yeah, that's it. Still has his own show on the front bar and, those sort of things. But, I grew up watching him. Like, shout out to the early shows. The D-Generation, that then became The Late Show, became The Panel, awesome shows of the 90s, which then they became Working Dog Productions, which most people would know them for, The Castle, The Dish, those kinds of things. But the point being that, Mick Malloy had a show with him, and this is what I've started writing about. Him and Tony Martin had their own show, Martin Malloy.
Yep.
Famous radio show, back in the day, back in the 90s. I think 90s going into the noughties, into the early 2000s. Yep. But I can remember, because I, primarily being such a big fan of Mick Malloy, another great guy to have on the show down the track. So putting that out there, shout out Mick Malloy if you end up hearing this, or if someone knows you.
Yep, get in touch.
Hit me up. I'd love to have Mick on the show. But, I remember watching him in his show and just going, I'd love to do that. Like, that natural banter, that ability to just tell stories and tell yarns, to entertain people first and foremost, but to educate and inform as well as entertain. Such a great thing. He ended up doing the same thing, jump forward to more recent times. So, they finished up a couple of years ago, but Mick Malloy and Jane Kennedy, again, who goes back to the early days of the D-Generation. They were all basically, like, they all went to the same university together. They were doing, like, university shows, university reviews, that kind of thing, which is pretty much how they started. And I've heard them talk and say about how their only real goal was to primarily make each other laugh and to entertain themselves. And then if someone else got a laugh out of it as well, happy days. And, they've been arguably one of the most successful teams in the history of Australian entertainment to actually do exactly that. It's then spun off into other shows, Utopia and all of the other things that they've spun off into, and even if they've sort of gone off and done their own things, they've had each other as guests on the show. The Martin Malloy show, as I said later, became the Kennedy Malloy show on Triple M radio, doing exactly the same thing, entertaining people, informing, educating, just telling stories, letting other people tell their stories, and just that banter, and just, I remember again just going, I'd love to do that. Like, that's what I would love to do. And then was fortunate enough to have a little bit of time working in, just unpaid, working in community radio, as you know, and doing some radio work there, which, it wasn't the same thing.
No.
It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but, like,
gave you a taste.
100%.
An insight into something that you would never have had a opportunity to do.
100%, yeah. Shout out to 4CRB, still on the Gold Coast radio station, still going. A lot of great people there. I was doing that right up, until like 2019, pre-COVID times. But which was the reason I had to stop doing it.
The border. Yeah.
But the point there that I'm making in the long way around is that it's all kind of led to this, in that, it's step by step. It's provided me with the skills, learning from acting training and then voice acting work, massive shout out there to Gabrielle Rogers, who's actually going to be our very first guest on the show. Gabrielle Rogers will be, show #001. But, the things that I've learnt have all kind of, led to me doing this, which I may or may not be successful at. Only time will tell, and it could go a long way, it could not. But again, back to what you were saying, we'll give it a red hot go and we'll step up and see how it all goes. But this is, I'm loving it. This is great. This is not even the first episode. This is the pilot. And I've had an absolute ball.
Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right?
Yeah. No guts, no glory, right?
Yes.
So I think that pretty much concludes our prequel, our pilot, our pre-first episode.
Yep.
So I'd like to thank you, big thank you to you for helping me to get this all set up and getting to the point where we are, and putting up with me getting things set up and working behind the scenes, and all of the time and commitment that it takes to get these things up and running, and for being a part of it. So big shout out to you and thank you, and
kudos to you for having a go.
Yeah, well, kudos to you for having a go with me, for being here and being on the show and helping me launch the pilot. And fingers crossed that it's the very start of the Craig Griffin universe. So thanks for being a part of it.
No worries. Good luck.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.